Oh, we're live. Thank you, everyone who's here joining us live. Champaca Bookstore is delighted to have Snigdha Poonam and Lavanya Lakshminarayan join us. As you know, if you're here, Champaca is an independent bookstore in Bangalore. We also have a store in Goa. And we've chosen Snigdha and Lavanya's books for our Reading India Champaka subscription program. We have an annual book subscription, which we have a theme for, and this year's Reading India. And we had read these two books independently at the bookstore. Several of us had read Dreamers, several of us had read Lavanya's Analog Virtual, and were very intrigued by a kind of commonality that they spoke to, even though they can seem disparate, like different genres and so on, because they were both considering what the near future will be in very different ways. So, to introduce the authors who are here with us so kindly, Snigdha Poonam is a journalist based in New Delhi, and her work has appeared in The Guardian, New York Times, Caravan, Granta, and other publications. And Dreamers is journalistic essays, or I would even call it cultural nonfiction, about how young Indians, I think now some years ago, 2018, right? Um,
Yeah.
think about the country, their futures, what they hope for. And I'm just reading aloud so that I get it right. So, Lavanya Lakshminarayan is a speculative fiction writer and a game designer from Bangalore. That's so cool. Uh, she's received an honorable mention from the AC Bose Grant for South Asian Speculative Literature in 2019, and her fiction has appeared in other anthologies like A Flash of Silver Green and Third Eye. And this book, I think, which is now called 10% Thief Abroad in a non Indian publication, has also been recently in the news quite a lot. I keep seeing reviews on social media of the book, and it's a series of sort of short speculative fiction essays in a world called Apex City. So we'll talk about that at length just now. So thank you again for being here. And yeah, so I just wanted to say that I found it so interesting the way I was able to make connections about India and the future in reading your books separately together. So, my first question to you is, do you see it? Do you see the connection? Have you engaged with each other's work? And do you even agree with this premise? Because I think that I was very curious about that. Anyone?
Um,
Lavanya, you
Do you
go.
want to jump in? I can.
yeah,
Um,
I quite agree. I think that yes, the future is was quite at the center of the in reporting and writing this book. And I read a bit of speculative fiction, and I have read I've heard about her book, and yeah, I really like you. I've been seeing reviews online and on social media, and really want to pick it up soon.
Okay.
yeah, likewise, it's amazing that, we've taken two different approaches to looking at the future, centering the future in India, in the Indian context. And it's wonderful that, you've brought these two very different approaches together. And I've been, seeing this book around. I really want to pick it up and read it because I think, if it had been around as I was writing, I possibly would have just picked it up for research. So, I'm really looking forward to reading it. Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things I was thinking about is, in a sense, Snigdha, your book is now, I don't know how it works in the world of writing, is 5 years old, or I mean, I suppose for journalism, I'm sure you have so much new stuff to say. I was very curious if you felt the need to pursue these stories or find new stories because India has been changing in such drastic ways, or there's so many things that you suggested in this book have deepened for our, in a visible way. You were suggesting hints and suggestions about how people were imagining the future. We were still on the brink of certain kinds of and when you start this book, I think it was before 2014 in your work. So you have like the privilege of having seen a decade roll by, and have you ever felt the need to revisit it, and have you stayed in touch with some of these people?
Yes, I have. I have thought about revisiting some of the stories. Not because I think much has changed. Yeah, if you read the newspapers or follow the news cycle from day to day, it will look like there's a new event, or maybe things are becoming worse or becoming better, or we have today a higher economic growth than we did in 2014, things like that. But I don't think that in terms of like a thematic structure for the book, and the ideas that propelled me to write it, I don't think that those have changed, and I think they will stay relevant for a long time. If anything, I would like to go back to some of the characters from the book, just to see where they find themselves, 5 years or 10 years after I met them. And I think just that's more as a storyteller. And I think anyone will have the same desire if you've been with someone for such a long time. And I think time is a very important idea for me in my work, in that I like to see time pass in someone's life. So I would like to go back to them. I don't know when, but I want, more time to pass. Like I said, it's not, this is not the time for me to go back to them, in another 10 years or so. I think we'll have to let at least 15 or 20 years pass for anything big to change in the sort of in the fabric of our nation's life, because the story is not just about these 6 or 7 people, but about India at this point of time. And that point of time could be 2018, but I think India will still be that place in 2028. So yeah, I hope that answers it.
That's very interesting. Yeah, that you're right. That I suppose things. I don't. When I say drastic change, I think like when you look at the events and the beginning of the book, there's a way in which in Dreamers, it's you start with looking ahead, what's about to happen, and then all those things kind of do happen. And now we're 10 years into it, and lots of those things have happened.
Yeah.
So, but I was, as you were speaking, I was thinking about the word dreamers, because Lavanya, you have dreamers in your characters in your short stories, and you have these kind of young people in this terrible world which constricts them, choosing to dream. And I found, because we'd sort of put them together, those parallels kept coming up. And I was thinking, are your books bleak, both your books, or are they actually hopeful? And they hold a little bit of both. So, Lavanya, I wondered what you think of that, how it felt to imagine this fairly difficult world and then plant hope. I'm not spoiling it for readers, but I'm saying plant hope. And I hope you appreciate my reference to your story. But
I
to
do.
kind of place
I
that
do.
there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's such a lovely parallel that you've drawn, because when I was writing this book, of course, as you mentioned, it's a pretty bleak world. It's a very constrained world. But I viewed each of my characters, and there are over 20 because it's a mosaic novel, all these vignettes connected together. Um, every one of them is, well, not every one of them, quite a few of my characters are very stuck in this world because they are controlled by the system governing it. They are a part of it. They believe in its philosophy. But there are these moments of questioning the overarching philosophy of the world they inhabit. And once they start questioning, just asking why things have to be a certain way, even if it's in a very selfish perspective, in the way that it affects you personally, the individual, um, that is the beginning of a minor act of resistance. And when you start to go down that road and you start looking around how the world and how it's affecting you and maybe your neighbor and maybe 3 other people, I think it's from that questioning that dreams come to life, right? They're the seeds of dreaming. Um, the sort of hesitance to accept the status quo, the minute that first a seed of doubt is planted in your brain. I think that's sort of the origin story of why we dream and why my characters then choose to start expressing their dreams, maybe not in the most dramatic ways, but in subtle ways that challenge the dominant narrative of their reality.
It's interesting how these things are bouncing back because the dreamers in your book, Snigdha, also are questioning the status quo. But it's at
Yeah.
a moment when, at the state level, because I mean, in a sense, um, it's going against the nation state's idea of so many kinds of things, whether it's, secularism or certain kinds of ideas of diversity. You have younger people asking for a country, but their visions are not always easy visions, and you allow yourself to state that, like you speak with great empathy about them, but you notice this, right, that there's this change in this generation. So you're both speaking to this thing of challenging the status quo and thinking about India in young people stuck in many ways, because these are people from smaller towns and different backgrounds than say I would have, and you've chosen to go along with them. So in view of what Lavanya has just said, how did you feel when you met people's visions? Because they are, in a sense, their dreams, their hopes, and you may or may not see things the same way. So I liked how you kept that open in your book very much, because we all have very strong views on everything. And when you look at something else and explain it, can you tell us about meeting these young people a little bit and their sense of what the status quo is?
Yeah, sure. And I also like what you said about the residences across our work, because I mean, Dreamers as a title came very late to me in the process of writing. I think it was around the last edit of the book when I was reading the stories, really like for the one of the last times before I would hand it over. And I would notice the number of times that people that I'd interviewed or sort of build the profiles of mention the term dream and dreaming and um, dreamers and or identifying themselves as a dreamer. And that's when it struck me that that is one of the unifying um, ideas for India's young generation, because if you really think about it, we are very new nation state, right? Like not even like 75 years old. So for a lot of them, for a lot of us, in fact, I think we talk of the future constantly. If you notice around you, whether it's politicians or industrialists or people in the social sector, journalists, we all try to look ahead to the future, because we already, we have like 75 years is not a long time. And this is this generation that does not accept a lot of things that say, I call, my generation, the bridge generation, because like for my parents, like there was very little questioning of the status quo in so many ways, whether, about the people that they would marry or the jobs that they would have, or, the kind of distance that they imagine between their parents' lives and their lives. But for the people that I profile in the book, they see themselves as blank state, whether or not that's doable at all. And I think that's the story of the book, in that whether these millions of hundreds of millions of people who suddenly have these ideas that are not connected to where they come from or what is possible for them, or what has been possible for people in their background or social class or caste or region. They for the first time in their communities, they want these things, and what happens to those dreams. And yes, as you said, I think a lot of the ideas that they have um, are not, I mean, not exactly the ideas that India's founding fathers thought of when they thought of the nation. I think it's that contrast that was really interesting to me, in that, there are these people who, unlike my father and my grandfather were so idealistic. And to some extent, even, I see myself as more of that kind of person than someone who will sort of radically try to reimagine my life. So yeah, I think it was interesting to me to just listen to them and try to depict a world in which these are people's thoughts and philosophies and dreams, and not try to put a filter.
Yeah. I was just wondering because you both have had to the form you use is very different, and they have different. I suppose with journalism, it comes with a lot of rules in some senses and codes, and with fiction, as you said, it's your own writing, but then you are having to base it on real futures. I read an interview where your work as a game designer informed so much of your knowledge about technology. So you have to draw on things you had to draw on understanding society in certain way, and Snigdha, you have to narrativize. And I know that journalists use a lot of like in their writing have to think about what kind of form you'll use and how you'll characterize the people you're profiling. So you're kind of coming at it in different ways. So at Champaca, we're always interested in how what the writing is like, what informs your writing, and if you could just share that with us, because it's really interesting to know what processes. Because did you consider, for example, Snigdha writing fiction from this, or was it always going to be non-fiction? Um, and Lavanya, in your interviews, you talk so much in a way that is like social science about society, because you're thinking about the relationship with technology and people and stuff. So if you can talk about what informs the way you enter your writing, that would be very fascinating, because I was really interested in the kind of very descriptive, strong worlds that we're situated in. There's a strong sense of place in both your books, which I like. So how did you get there? Where does your self lie?
Snigdha, do you want to hop in or should
Um,
I?
yeah, sure. For me, it's like somewhere between fiction and nonfiction. I would write fiction if real life didn't give me such great material. Um, I grew up reading fiction, and I still read fiction as my main. Those are the majority of the books that I read on a daily basis. Um, and I don't think that there are that many differences that a lot of people think of when they think of these two forms, because as you said, as if you're writing a book of journalism in whatever format, creative or otherwise, you will have some principles to follow. Like everything that you write has to be based on facts. And you would have, in some sense, a greater responsibility towards people that you write about, because whether or not they're living or dead, these are people who are real. And you don't want to, get something wrong or betray their trust, or, just manipulate the circumstances of their lives. But that being said, once you know those principles, and you do your best to stick by them. And then, when it comes to craft, I see, for me, there are a lot of similarities, because I've only ever sort of practiced creative nonfiction. So for me, it's very important to think of beginning, middle, and end, and story, and characters, and scenes, and I like to have the people that I write about. Um, I like to see them in very different scenarios, talking to other people, taking actions, debating choices, so that you can really get into their characters. The one thing that I can't do, and no one can do, as a journalist, is to really get inside someone's mind. And I think that just like is, I guess I think that for me is like the key difference, in that I can describe a person or event as well as you would read it in fiction, but I can't tell you what was someone's like deepest thoughts, no matter what they tell me, because people lie, and people sort of exaggerate, and people do all those things that we all do. And sort of, I mean, the same, if you wrote a profile of me, you will never get to the truest me. But there's a lot you can do if you have really good material. And I think, again, like even for fiction writers, and I would love to hear what Lavanya has to say, but I see them, a lot of my friends write fiction, and I see them spending a lot of time in the libraries and talking to people and and reading and researching and, just like gathering a lot of material from real life. So yeah, I think for me, it's not such a strict boundary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with Snigdha because I'm doing exactly this, constantly observing the world around me, observing people in the world, figuring out how they work. And in the context of this book, I worked in game design, so I had this very close relationship with the shape technology was taking, at least in, the sphere of entertainment, which is, where gaming lands. Um, so I had my own experience of it. But then, when the initial sort of thought for this book popped into my head, I kind of stepped outside of my own personal experiences and started to draw on other people's experiences, either through, just chatting with them, right, about how, simple things like talking to my grandmother who plays Candy Crush about why she plays Candy Crush, right? Or um, figuring out how cab drivers in the city are using their smartphones by chatting with them or watching them. It sounds strange, but for a lot of it, you are a bit of a fly on the wall, trying to see how people are interacting with this technology. And when I was writing this book, something that struck me was, I belonged to the gaming industry and therefore to a little slice of Bangalore's whole startup IT culture. And that is a bubble when it comes to access to technology, to interactions with technology, the way technology is being used, just because it's so gated by so many degrees of privilege. And the rest of the world, including family who don't work in this space, view technology and their relationship with technology completely differently. And armed with all of this observation, I then went into, a ton of research. I mean, picking apart things in a whole bunch of science magazines. It was very nerdy research, but I enjoyed it because what I was trying to do is build a picture of one of the possible ways technology might manifest in the future, for better or for worse, because I don't believe that it's, inherently evil or anything, right? It's a double-edged sword. It depends on who's building it, why we're building it, and what it's going to eventually be used for. Um, so in that sense, there was a lot of very real-world research going on. And after that, I decided, while this was going on, people would pop into my head, my characters, and I would think, if if someone like this existed in a world where these were the limits of technology or these were the sort of horizons opened up to them by technology, how would they navigate this space? And then I would go off and kind of explore their minds, and figure out what technology meant to them in their personal capacity. And that's kind of how the book took shape.
I have so many things to say. It's so exciting. Lavanya, one thing I noticed is that now you talk about clearly how much work you've had to do to understand and think about the role technology can play in a society like the one you've constructed. But your stories feel very human. They don't feel like, Black Mirror episodes where you're moralizing. I love Black Mirror. I'm not being mean when I say they're moralizing, but um, when the point is they try to give you a takeaway from if this is how you imagine technology, but your stories are about the people and the way they seem to seek freedom. So in that sense, I didn't feel like the stories were weighed down. It's kind of like the implicit structure of the world you've built in, and you've created a lot of you've put in a lot of thought about what is this individual feeling and thinking. And I wonder how much that has emerged from your reading of speculative fiction and science fiction, right? Because at Champaka also we find it very interesting when those questions emerge, very human questions, and not just about like superpowers or technology and technocracy and things like that. It's like the spaceship is interesting because of what happens within it. That's the way I feel like you've done your work. And yeah, I'll ask Snigdha a question after you respond to this. Don't want to overload you all. Yeah.
Thank you for your kind words. To me, it was very important to approach every single one of my characters with empathy because, when I'm reading science fiction, this is what makes me tick. These incredibly strange worlds, the rules of reality are shifted by a few degrees. It's like a little sandbox, right, where you change a couple of parameters, but every parameter of relatable reality, when you switch it up just a little bit, people will behave differently. And how are people going to respond to this? If a very basic example, but say we had no gravity for a day, what would human beings do in that situation? And that's what's interesting. And so when I was building this world and I had this technocracy running it, they're not wonderful people. They are merit obsessed, performance driven people. And so they turn reality into a hyper competitive system where it's cutthroat competition. And I wanted to see how that would impact different types of people and how they would respond to it in different circumstances. And that's also why I chose to do a novel with 20 characters, which is a bit insane. And it was really hard to really get into that process of traveling in each person's lives and getting into their heads. And a lot of the time I disagreed with my characters. My perspective did not match the way they view the world they live in. But I wanted to treat them with empathy because eventually they are a product of their reality. They have their biases within their reality. I have my opinions, but this character is, they are their own person. And so I enjoy fiction across genres that gives me the space as a reader to meet characters or people in the books halfway. And because for me, it's a very interesting reflective process. Somebody is not telling me what to think or feel. They're inviting me to participate and see how I react. And based on how I react, I'm actually learning a lot about my own self and the way I view the world. And that's the kind of fiction I enjoy. So that's what I was trying to do with these characters.
That's really, really, yeah. Because I mean, I would be very, it's kind of like daunting to create this really detailed world where you've done a lot of research and imagined it, and uh, then enter, like, that's very exciting to me. Like, that you had a question running through and it came through quite nicely. And because we're talking about technology, my question, Snigdha, is that I'm just kind of also enjoying picking on the different connections in this. So,
Sure.
technology is very present in the way these young people you meet are imagining their future, and for them, it's like a tool to use or a world to exist in or a pathway towards something. So
Yeah.
I can, in your book, you kind of also kept exploring what this world of technology was suggesting to these people, what that world of technology meant. So whether it's the call center or it's the, you have the clickbait factory. It's a kind of relationship with the world mediated through technology. So you were exploring people's relationship with it in that way. So how much did you consider these tools? Because in both ways, it seems to be that the world is structured by something external to us, and these human beings are trying to exist in it. So I also found the way you try to understand that world quite empathetic. And what kind of thoughts did you have in encountering that?
Yeah, technology was a big element. in their lives, in all our lives, I would say, but I think especially
Yeah.
for younger people. When I first started researching the book, I remember having a conversation in Delhi with someone who worked in ads, and they have really solid understanding of what's going on with people, because they always thinking of like people in like large, in terms of like large masses. So I think it really helps me to talk to someone who makes ads. And I think he said something that really sort of stuck with me at that time. And he said that, because when I was writing, Facebook was really big. And he said that, for a lot of people that I'll meet, I'll find that it is for the first time because of Facebook that they were asked to describe themselves in a few lines, like the bio, the idea of a bio, which we didn't have earlier. And it made me think, yes, before Facebook, we didn't really have it's not a question that not every single person, because there are people in India who don't have access to internet or social media. But, I'm talking about people like more than 500 million people in India use the internet, and nearly all of them have had to think about that, on whatever social media that they are. So it's not just thinking about their identity, but also their ideology, what to post, how to react to a news event, how to talk about their lives. So that really kind of really pulled me towards exploring that more, like the role that tech plays in each of their lives. And it was so different, right? I mean, even for people who were really young and didn't just wanted to sort of like for guys who wanted to talk to girls. I mean, WhatsApp was the only way in which they could do that. And same for the girls, because I'm talking about very small places, towns, villages, and it's still very difficult for people to go out and go on a date. So I think that it becomes something like a WhatsApp or a Telegram becomes the only place where they interact with someone that they like, they love, they have a crush on. I mean, again, in terms of like work and opportunities and ideas of where their lives can go, ambition, technology came up again and again. So many people, as I followed them, started to see, like a YouTube channel or or even like a TikTok. I mean, of course, TikTok became really, really huge around 2020. So I think how, they could become an influencer. So I saw like the very early phases of that ambition. And I remember I wrote a profile. It's a very dreamer style for the Economist, in which there was a 20 or 21-year-old guy from a village in UP that became a huge TikTok influencer with 2 million followers then. And just to follow his life from that village to Bombay, where he came to be managed by an agency, was to see how that dream played out, but also like the hurdles and how things kept going back to where you were from, and what are your social and economic circumstances, and how much tech can enable you to dream, and what are the boundaries of that, of those possibilities that I'm sure Lavanya would have known, less living in Bangalore. She talked about that bubble, and I know that bubble. Um, Not as well as herself, but I understand what she's talking about, because it can give you an idea that anything is possible. But we're also live in a country with really crushing inequalities, and so everyone can have the same dream, but the distance that they can travel varies from person to person, and it often goes back to where you come from.
Yeah, that I guess both of you have said it so nicely that in listening to you, that the books both seem to be about the different ways our dreams are mediated in a reality that's completely, like you said, it's got crushing inequality and difference. And there's, I mean, I guess, Snigdha, your book is nonfiction, but Lavanya, your book, it's like so close to reality, and you're projecting forwards, thinking backwards. There's this sense of a negotiation going on in both books, which, in a sense, just made me think of our lives in India and the future of India quite a lot, because we're often reading about that, engaging about that. And I like the way the books kind of resonated with that. And um, I mean, I also have to say it's really nice hearing these thoughts, because they're both sort of by the power of research and suggestion and fiction. And they're not op ed pieces, in that sense. So it's like you're letting these questions emerge from your work. And I'm very curious, and they felt very much like not these kind of proclamatory voices you hear about the future of India and op-eds by men, or that sort of thing, where, or policymakers or politicians, but it comes from two people who are curious and exploring. So I just wanted to ask you, like, what sort of books inspired each of you to come to these books that you wrote yourself? Because it's very interesting to see, and how much of it was in the Indian context, because I think both these books are quite unusual for the Indian context, and that's why I was very thrilled by them. So, if you can tell us about some of your reading in India, what other kinds of forms inspired you, it would be very nice.
Sure. Do you want to go first?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I I said earlier, I read a lot of fiction, so I think that's always kind of playing in my mind. I'm attracted to stories, so whether they're fiction or nonfiction, or graphic novel, or comic book, and or films. I think I'm really influenced by films, and I'll watch a play if it's it's a good story. So I think I kind of I'm always thinking in terms of stories. I'm kind of crazy about them, really. And so Dreamers for me was not it did not start with an intellectual inquiry. I wasn't thinking what is the future of this generation, or India, or India's future in the world. I was really thinking this is would be an amazing story, because I'd been a journalist for some time then, and I was very much as a ground reporter, so I was very close to people, talking to them wherever they were, and in a lot of different places. And often I found myself talking to younger people, whether it was a story about politics or crime or culture or technology, and regardless of what the context was for my meeting them, they kept talking about their their future, and their frustrations with where they were, and what they wanted to do. And after some time, like after a few years, I thought, or I started to think, if we're talking about so many people who find themselves in this moment, where they have these really grand ideas of where they want their lives to go, whether it is a future in business, or politics, or Bollywood, and these are all, like, fields in which you need, it's not easy to break into. So I thought, why don't I just take them at their word and start to follow them? If they want to go and become a Bollywood star, or they want to, enter politics in Uttar Pradesh and fight an election, let's see where, or someone wants to start a business, let's see where it can get them. And so really it was, I saw the potential for a story. And I read, when I was starting out, the second part of your question, when I was starting out as a creative nonfiction writer, I was really hungry for inspiration, and for someone to teach me how to do that. So I read nearly everyone I could find in the genre, from John McPhee. I think it's a very American style of writing about reality. So I had to read a lot of the masters, Gate Elise. I read lots of Joan Didion. But I think that once I had a good grounding in that style, I read Tom Wolfe, Norman Mailer. I can just keep going on about the books that taught me and influenced me. But then at some point I stopped because I wanted to then go back to reading more literary fiction because once you have that sense of the craft, then you can just keep applying it to different subjects, and then to then really go deeper with that style, you then have to be better at building a profile, or like knowing someone, describing someone, writing someone's story. And for that, I keep saying to to people who want to follow this style to read more fiction and not just like think that because it's I mean, of course, journalism is your tool to get those stories. Just reading journalism will not help you write the stories in a way that just feels universal and lasting um, and interesting.
Yeah,
So
no,
if you could recommend to our readers, oh, sorry.
sorry, go on. No, lots of parallels, but go on, Kavya. Sorry.
I was just going to ask Snigdha if you could recommend two books to our audience here that kind of have a lasting impact on you. That, one may be creative nonfiction and something literary. What would they be?
I mean, I would say all of Joan Didion, because she writes fiction and nonfiction, and you can see how someone moves across these styles and how the approach can be the same. And how you don't just write as a creative nonfiction writer, but also think and see and talk to people as someone who is a creative nonfiction writer. In terms of just pure, creative nonfiction, just picking up the skills, knowing just how far you can go with that style. This book called Random Family. I think anyone who wants to understand this format of writing needs to read that book at some point in their journey.
Who's that by?
Adrienne Nicole LeBlanc.
Okay. Thank you. So over to you, Lavanya, if you could also tell us about books at the end of your thoughts.
So very similar to what Snigdha was saying. I'm enjoying the overlaps despite the very different forms in some ways. Because even for me, I think I've read across genres since I could read. So regardless of whether we're talking about spec fic, more fantasy, I don't know, literary fiction, crime fiction, thriller, nonfiction, I will read anything that kind of catches my fancy. So going into this, it's hard for me to pinpoint specific influences that were very direct because there was this background of all of this reading. And when I started writing Analog, Virtual, or The 10% Thief, it wasn't on the basis of, again, like an intellectual pursuit or a specific question. I started writing it because I'd worked in games at that time for about 7 years. It's a very challenging industry because it is constantly high performance chasing deadlines. So you are always working. And I would routinely work, 12-hour days. Everybody would. I'm not unique in this. And I decided to take a bit of a break because it was getting very stressful. And during this time, of course, when I was working nonstop, I would try and do everything remotely. So run all of my errands remotely if possible. So, if I could Dunzo, I don't think Instamart was around back then, but if I could Dunzo vegetables, I'd do that. If I could, send things to friends using courier services, I would do that. So I was very removed from physical reality because I was pursuing this effectively virtual reality, right? I'm building entertainment on web and mobile platforms. And when I took this break, I thought, let me go out. It's a lovely day outside. I will walk down to the grocery store and buy myself my weekly groceries. And so I can make my own dinner and it'll be a lovely experience. It was not a lovely experience because I walked into the grocery store and I had a panic attack because it was so overwhelming to suddenly be surrounded by these aisles of things you can buy, right? Because on your phone, you're just scrolling. You have your past purchase history. It's just, yep, I know I like to eat these things, let me add it. But when you're in a physical grocery store, it's things you can pick up, and here is infinite choice. And I didn't know what to do with it. And that actually prompted me to question you know, what reality actually looked like to me and what shape it was taking. And if this happened to me, then who else could this happen to? And I'm saying this now like it's unique. We've actually all lived through this experience because there was a pandemic. And,
Yeah.
after the first lockdown, this is what everyone felt. But this happened way before the pandemic. And it was really stark. And this prompted me to think, oh my goodness, I know technology is doing a lot of good things for me, but what else is it doing in my life? And that's where the book began. But I guess, in the background, in terms of influences leading into even deciding I'm going to write speculative fiction and this is what I want to write, I would say if I'm going way back, George Orwell, Ray Bradbury, Ursula Le Guin, huge influences. More recently, writers like Lavi Tidar. In the Indian context, Samit Basu, who, for I grew up reading American stuff or British stuff because that's all we had. And then Samit comes in and writes in an Indian setting with an Indian voice and kind of legitimizes that this is a thing. Like you can write, and I'm not even considering translation, but you can write in English as an Indian and imagine other worlds and futures and stuff. So that's a huge influence. But all of this, kind of, I would say in a very non-linear, nebulous way, leading up to this point where this happens to me in real life. And I think I'm going to write a book about this. And I'm going to see, draw from my reality, draw from the people around me, draw from my experiences working in tech and speculate, ask what if. Yeah. As far as
Do you
book
have any
recommendations,
recommendations? Yeah, yeah. Sorry, just reminding you. Yeah.
um, look, this is vast and endless in terms of recommendations. But I will say, if people have enjoyed reading Analog Virtual, I think the same year Samit Basu's Chosen Spirits released in India, and it is also a take on Near Future India set in Delhi. So, there are a lot of parallels, but there's a lot of contrast because of the place and the way the place has evolved and shapes events. So if you've enjoyed Analog Virtual and The Dreamers, you might also enjoy this. Otherwise, I would recommend probably anything by Ursula Le Guin and anything by Lavi Tidar. I mean, just, yes, read those books.
Yeah, we're big Ursula Le Guin fans at Champaca also. Uh, and I'm just going to check if we have any questions on from our audience. I think not that many. I'll just check. There are not that many questions, so we'll just leave it open. I have a lot of questions, so I'll keep asking. Um, what I'm so curious about how, to me, it's suggesting translation, because I'm sure, Snigdha, your journalism includes meeting people and then translating what they say and
Yeah.
bringing that into your work, and the experience of understanding technology, translating your own experience and bringing it in. So do you feel like, I mean, this is one of our preoccupations at Champaka, like translation is not just from language to language, it's experience to fiction, experience to writing. So did you think about that a lot, a kind of translation between things?
Yeah, such a great question that I've never had to answer before. But yes, I think translation is just all of my work deals with translation because, if you're writing about real life in India, then you're talking to people who speak in their vernacular language, whether it's Haryanvi or Hindi or Tamil or Malayalam. And then I have to, because I write in English, have to translate, but not just language, but also I'm finicky about note taking and then trying to really sort of convey as best I can what they're saying and what they're trying to say, and what that comes from. And so I feel like half of my work is just being a translator. And then if you're an Indian writing about India, but for a foreign reader, or let's just say readers at this point. I don't want to talk about other formats in which I work. Then again, like you're trying to explain, the stories that are set in India, but also not kind of pander to a Western gaze, or exotify yourself and the people that you spoke to and the events that took place in India. So I think there's a lot of thinking that goes behind that, and to translate language, to translate context, to translate culture. I think it's an ongoing thing. And I also read a lot in translation, so I kind of try to see how people who do that primarily do that. How they kind of like stay true to the source material, but also are able to be creative with that craft.
Yeah. Lavanya?
It is again, similar because one, you are with analog, virtual, or the 10% peak, so much emphasis on technology, but translating the technology of the present into a version in the future that is, when you look at how rapidly technology has developed, you don't know what shape it's going to take, but just being able to make it relatable to somebody today who's used to a smartphone, and then open that up to things like augmented reality and virtual reality and how far we could be. That was a really fun challenge to play with for me. I like to give this example a lot. There's a very cult speculative fiction book called Neuromancer by William Gibson, and it's one of the influences for those the Matrix movies. And he recently released, what was it, the 25th anniversary, 40th, I'm not sure, an edition. And he wrote a preface to it. And one of the biggest questions he says he's been asked is why there are no cell phones in his book. And this book was written in the 70s, so, or the late 70s, early 80s. So attempting to translate technology into something that is something that feels real while being wildly not real. And I'm not a scientist, I'm not saying this is the shape technology will take. This is what I see it taking, maybe, is where I stand. That was a lot of fun. The other thing was translating a vision of India in the future. Events in this book take place in the future of Bangalore. And translating the present of Bangalore, again, into that future version, without giving into, I really like that, Snigdha, you brought up the Western gaze, because that can really impose itself into your version of your very rooted reality in Bangalore. And working to not go down that route, but at the same time working to create something, because as much as you don't want to pander to the Western gaze, especially in the realm of technology, there is so much influence from the West, post-globalization and all of that. A lot of the tech we build and we're working on, it's developed in California, right? So how do you balance those two worlds and create technology that feels like it was built here, but also acknowledges the reality that it's probably not being built for regular people in India by Indians for a certain vision, which I know happens, but it doesn't happen enough. And so kind of reflecting that, that was tricky, but fun to think about. The other thing was thinking about language in my book. It's a very minor spoiler, but everyone in this future of Bangalore only speaks English, and you cannot speak your local language, whatever it is, whether it's Kannada, Tamil, Hindi, because what the sort of, I guess, organization, the hierarchy of this world wants to do is unify people to a certain thought process. And when you start erasing languages, you start erasing alternative ways of thinking and framing the world. And that was something that I wanted to reflect on in this book. So everybody only speaks English. That was stark.
Wow.
It really shaped the world. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're almost at 1. I don't want to stop talking to both of you, but we're going to have to close this session. So I just wanted to say to our readers who are here, Dreamers and Analog Virtual are available in store at Champaca and on our online store. They're wonderful books. Please pick them up. And please look up Snigdha's journalism. And Lavanya has some great interviews, by the way. I really enjoyed them. Please look them up. We'll try and share them with our book club for sure. And thank you both so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed the conversation. And I still feel there's so much to mine. And I thought I had thought about some of these things, but this conversation has brought up just a certain kind of depth that you've gone to explore questions. So really keen on reading more from you, and really keen on maybe meeting you at Champaka at some point. So thank you so much for being here, and I will reluctantly close this call with you.
Thank you.
So
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank
thanks.
you.
Okay, so bye everyone. Thank you for joining us today.
Bye, everyone.